Judge, these estates were drained before the heirs got a dime.
Those estates had no heirs anyone could find.
There are two versions of Calvin Mercer: the probate judge his county trusted to protect the estates of the dead, and the man on the federal indictment who spent 6 years stealing from them. Both are the same person.
And the administrators you picked billed them dry.
Someone had to manage what nobody claimed.
But the money came back to you, Calvin.
He never got to finish that sentence. Within 90 days of this confrontation, federal agents would walk into his chambers with a sealed indictment, his black judicial robe still hanging from the brass hook beside the door. 6 years, 41 estates, $2.7 million routed through 3 shell companies and into an account he controlled under a business alias. The Honorable Calvin Mercer had spent 34 years building the trust that allowed him to steal from people who could no longer speak for themselves. The dead, the forgotten, the ones with no family left to ask questions. By the time the questions finally came, the money was already gone. Before we go any further, I want you to think about something. Probate court is the one room in the entire justice system where the victim is already dead. They cannot testify. They cannot object. They cannot point at the man stealing from them. So, I have to ask you this. How do you catch someone who only takes from people who can no longer speak? Drop your answer in the comments below, and hit subscribe if you want to see exactly how it happened, because the way the federal government finally cornered Calvin Mercer is one of the most patient investigations I have ever read. Calvin Eugene Mercer was born on April 9th, 1963, in a 2-bedroom shotgun house on Madison Street in Macon, Georgia. His father, Eugene Mercer, worked second shift at the Brown and Williamson tobacco plant on Riverside Drive for 28 years. His mother, Pearline Mercer, cleaned offices in the Bibb County Courthouse 3 nights a week. Calvin would later tell colleagues that he first walked the marble floors of that courthouse at the age of 7, helping his mother carry her bucket and her bottle of ammonia between the second-floor offices after closing. He was the third of 5 children. His older sister Ruby became a schoolteacher. His older brother Marcus joined the Army and served 2 tours in Vietnam. Calvin was the bookish one, the quiet one. By the 8th grade, he was reading at a college level. By the 10th grade, he was working weekends at the Bibb County Law Library shelving cases for 40 cents an hour and asking questions of any attorney who would answer them. He graduated from Northeast High School in 1981 in the top 10 of his class. He enrolled at Morehouse College that fall on a partial academic scholarship and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. He bussed tables at Pascal's restaurant in Atlanta on weekends. He took the late shift at a campus security desk 3 nights a week. His transcripts showed a 3.81 grade point average and a single B in second semester organic chemistry. He took the LSAT in the fall of 1984 and scored in the 94th percentile. He enrolled at the University of Georgia School of Law the following year. His classmates remembered him as relentlessly polite, almost formal, and so prepared for cold calls that one professor reportedly began skipping him because the answers were always correct, and the discussion was therefore never interesting. He clerked his second summer for Judge Walter Brackenridge, a senior probate judge in Macon who took an immediate interest in the young man from Madison Street. That clerkship, more than anything else, decided his future. Calvin married Loretta Whitfield, a public school speech pathologist, in the summer of 1988, 3 weeks after his law school graduation. Their son Calvin Jr. was born in 1991. Their daughter Tasha followed in 1994. He passed the Georgia bar on his first attempt and took a position with the Bibb County Public Defender's Office at a starting salary of $24,500 per year. For 5 years, he handled juvenile delinquency, appointed criminal defense, and the occasional civil matter. His evaluations from that period described him as extraordinarily prepared, respectful of the court at all times, and the kind of attorney who restored your faith in appointed counsel. In 1994, he moved to a small civil practice on Mulberry Street, focusing on estate administration, will contests, and uncontested probate matters. Within 4 years, he was the most frequently appointed estate administrator in Bibb County for cases involving small intestate estates. The probate judges trusted him. The clerks trusted him. The few heirs who managed to locate the office and inquire about a deceased relative's belongings trusted him too. In 2002, at the age of 39, Calvin Mercer ran for a seat on the Bibb County Probate Court. He won the Democratic primary by 19 points and ran unopposed in the general election. He was sworn in on January 6, 2003, in a ceremony attended by his 91-year-old mother, who lived just long enough to see her son in the robe she had once swept the floors beneath. For the first 11 years, no one inside the courthouse had a bad word to say about him. He was re-elected in 2006, 2010, and 2014, each time without a serious challenger. The Macon Telegraph profiled him in 2012 as part of a series on judges who had risen from working-class backgrounds. The piece quoted 3 different attorneys describing him as the most ethical judge in central Georgia. His annual financial disclosures showed a household income of approximately $140,000 per year, a paid-off home off Forest Hill Road, and one outside investment account valued at under $50,000. Or that is what the disclosures showed. The reality looked very different. To understand what Calvin Mercer did, you have to understand what probate court actually is and how easily it can be bent by a man wearing the robe. Probate court is the part of the legal system that handles what happens to a person's belongings after they die. If you wrote a will, the court verifies it, names the executor you chose, and supervises the distribution of your assets. If you did not write a will, the court declares your estate intestate and follows state law to find your closest living relatives, determine what you owned, pay your final bills, and divide whatever is left among your heirs. In Bibb County, the probate court handles roughly 900 new cases every year. Most of them are routine. A widow files her late husband's will. Adult children divide their mother's modest savings. The court approves the paperwork in under 30 days, and the family moves on. But there is a second category of probate case, and this is where Calvin Mercer made his money. When a person dies and no heirs come forward, the estate enters a different track entirely. The court appoints an administrator, almost always an attorney with experience in estate work, who is responsible for 3 things: identifying and securing the deceased person's assets, locating any living relatives no matter how distant, and distributing whatever is left after debts and fees are paid. If no heir can be found within a statutorily defined period, the remaining assets escheat to the state of Georgia and are deposited into the unclaimed property fund. The administrator is paid from the estate itself. Georgia law allows reasonable administrative fees, typically between 3 and 7% of the gross estate value, plus reimbursement for documented expenses. The probate judge has broad discretion to approve those fees. The judge also has broad discretion in selecting which attorney gets appointed as administrator in the first place. In other words, the judge decides who gets the work, and the judge decides what they get paid for the work, and the only person reviewing those decisions is the judge himself. There are guardrails, in theory: annual financial disclosures, judicial conduct rules, random audits by the state administrative office, a heir-search process that is supposed to be diligent and documented. In practice, every one of those guardrails depends on someone outside the courthouse caring enough to look. And for cases involving deceased people with no apparent family, nobody outside the courthouse is looking. That is the entire definition of the case type. The victim is dead. The heirs are unknown. The money sits in an account waiting to be distributed by a judge who answers to no one because no one is paying attention. Calvin Mercer understood this better than anyone in the building. He had been the administrator on dozens of these cases himself in the years before he took the bench. He knew exactly which screws were loose. He knew exactly who would notice if they were tightened. He knew exactly how long it took for a distant cousin in another state to even learn that their relative had died, much less to retain counsel and start asking questions. And he knew that in Georgia, that timeline almost always ran out before the money did. That trust, the trust the entire system placed in the discretion of one elected judge, was about to be exploited at a scale no one in the building had imagined possible. The first estate Calvin Mercer is believed to have looted belonged to a man named Wendell Pierce, who died in his sleep on March 12, 2017, in a rented room above a barbershop on Pio Nono Avenue. Pierce was 73 years old. He had worked 26 years as a janitor at the Macon Coliseum. He had no spouse, no children, and no known siblings. His landlord found him on a Sunday morning when he failed to come down for his usual coffee. The Bibb County coroner ruled natural causes. The Bibb County Probate Court took possession of his belongings within a week. What Wendell Pierce had, on paper, was a single passbook savings account at a Wells Fargo branch on Vineville Avenue containing $41,600. He had been depositing $200 a month into that account since 1991, the year his mother died, the year he stopped having anyone to send money to. The account had not been touched in 26 years. It had simply grown. Judge Mercer appointed an attorney named Reginald Hampton as administrator of the Pierce estate. Hampton had been a classmate of Mercer's at Morehouse. He had a small practice on Cherry Street, and he handled appointments from the probate court roughly 4 times a year. The appointment order was signed on March 24, 2017. Hampton filed a heir-search report on May 8th of that year, stating that no living relatives could be located. He filed a fee schedule on June 12th, requesting $4,800 in administrative fees, $3,200 in extended heir-search expenses, and an additional $6,100 in fees for an entity called Sentinel Estate Services, LLC, described as a third-party asset resolution specialist. Judge Mercer approved every line of that schedule on June 14, 2017. He did so without a hearing. He did so without a single question. After fees, the Pierce estate was reduced from $41,600 to a balance of $27,500. That balance, after the statutory waiting period, escheated to the state of Georgia. The state collected it. The state filed it away. Nobody asked any questions, because there was nobody to ask them on Wendell Pierce's behalf. Sentinel Estate Services, LLC, had been registered with the Georgia Secretary of State on January 8, 2017, 10 weeks before Wendell Pierce died. Its listed organizer was a Macon area paralegal named Bernadette Olson. Its mailing address was a UPS store mailbox on Forsyth Road. Its only bank account was at a credit union in Warner Robins. The funds it collected from the Pierce estate moved within 48 hours into a second entity called Brookhaven Asset Resolution, LLC. From Brookhaven, the funds moved into a third entity called Magnolia Fiduciary Group, LLC. From Magnolia, they were wired into a business checking account in the name of C. Marshall Holdings, an alias that traced, through a registered agent in Delaware, back to Calvin Mercer's home address. It took him 4 estates to refine the pattern. By the end of 2017, he had moved roughly $71,000 through that pipeline. By the end of 2018, the number was $340,000. By the end of 2019, it was just under $900,000. He never used the same administrator twice in a row. He rotated 3 of them, all old friends, all of whom received roughly 40% of the inflated fees as compensation for their participation. The remaining 60% flowed through the shell companies and into the accounts only he controlled. He was patient. He was selective. He targeted only estates where no heir had surfaced within 60 days of the death, which meant he was almost always working with the belongings of people the world had already forgotten. Janitors, boarding house tenants, retired bus drivers. A woman who had cleaned hotel rooms at the Hilton Garden Inn for 31 years and lived alone in a single-wide trailer off Eisenhower Parkway. A Korean War veteran whose pension and modest brokerage account had grown to almost $300,000 by the time he died at 94 in a Macon nursing home. The signs were there if anyone had been looking. His annual financial disclosures showed nothing. But in 2018, he paid cash for a vacation home on Lake Sinclair. In 2019, he bought his wife a Lexus from a dealership in Atlanta and paid the entire $47,000 price in a single wire transfer from an account no one at the courthouse had ever seen. In 2020, he financed his son's first house in Decatur with a $120,000 gift that he reported nowhere. No one noticed. No one checked. The judge approved the fees. The administrators cashed the checks. The shell companies moved the money. And the dead, as dead people do, said nothing at all. The estate that ended Calvin Mercer's career belonged to a man he never met, in a county he had never lived in. And the woman who pulled the thread that unraveled the entire operation was an attorney from St. Paul, Minnesota, who had never set foot in the state of Georgia. Her name was Adrienne Wexler. She was a 47-year-old probate and estate attorney with a small practice in downtown St. Paul. In the spring of 2023, she was retained by a woman named Eileen Hollister, a retired postal worker from Bloomington, Minnesota, who had recently learned through an ancestry website that she was the closest living relative of a great-uncle named Theodore Hollister, who had died alone in a Macon nursing home in October of 2021. Theodore Hollister had been an Air Force veteran. He had retired from a 41-year career as a mechanical draftsman at a small engineering firm in Macon. He had outlived 3 siblings, a wife, and 1 adult son who had died in a car accident in 1994. By the time he died at the age of 88, the closest blood relative he had on the planet was a great-niece in Minnesota who had not known he existed. Eileen Hollister did not particularly care about the money. She wanted, she told Adrienne Wexler, to know what had happened to her great-uncle's belongings, especially a small set of military medals and a leather-bound journal he had reportedly kept during his service. She wanted to know if anyone had come to his funeral. She wanted to know where he was buried. Wexler agreed to handle the inquiry on a flat fee. She filed a formal petition with the Bibb County Probate Court in May of 2023, requesting all records related to the administration of the Theodore Hollister estate. What she received in response was a thin packet of documents that did not add up. The estate had been administered by an attorney named Marvin Doss, whose appointment order had been signed by Judge Calvin Mercer on November 19, 2021. The administrator's fee schedule, approved by Judge Mercer on March 4, 2022, included $6,200 in routine administration, $5,400 in extended heir-search expenses, $7,300 to an entity called Sentinel Estate Services for asset resolution, and another $4,100 to a separate entity called Brookhaven Asset Resolution for fiduciary intermediary services. In total, $23,000 in fees on a gross estate of $58,400, roughly 39% of the estate, consumed before a single penny went anywhere else. Adrienne Wexler had been a probate attorney for 19 years. She had never, in her entire career, seen administrative fees exceed 12% of an estate that small. She had certainly never seen 2 separate asset resolution entities, both billing the same estate for what appeared to be the same service. She did what good attorneys do. She started pulling other files. Over the course of 6 weeks in the summer of 2023, Wexler pulled the public administrative records on every Bibb County probate case from the previous 5 years that involved an estate with no surviving spouse or children. She found 27 cases. In 19 of them, fees from Sentinel Estate Services appeared. In 16 of those, Brookhaven Asset Resolution appeared as well. In 11 of them, Magnolia Fiduciary Group appeared as a third-line item. The pattern was so consistent, it stopped looking like coincidence and started looking like a template. On August 11, 2023, Adrienne Wexler picked up her office phone and called the Atlanta field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The agent who took her call was named Daryl Whitmore. He was a 31-year veteran of the FBI's Public Corruption Squad. He had worked judicial corruption cases in Louisiana, in Pennsylvania, and in 2 separate counties in North Georgia. He listened to Adrienne Wexler talk for 40 minutes. He took 14 pages of notes. At the end of the call, he told her, in the careful, neutral voice of an agent who has just been handed the case of his career, that he would be opening a file and that she should not discuss what she had found with anyone, including her client. The investigation that followed lasted 14 months. It was not a sting. There were no wires. There was no informant. There was simply a forensic accounting team working through bank records, and a public corruption squad working through corporate filings, and a federal grand jury sitting in Atlanta listening to a story that grew more specific with every subpoena returned. The first break came in October of 2023, when investigators traced the registered agent for Magnolia Fiduciary Group, the third of the three shell entities, back to a small filing service in Wilmington, Delaware. That service produced, under subpoena, the original incorporation paperwork. Buried in the documents was a single signature line authorizing fund transfers, signed in a hand that the FBI's questioned documents unit later matched to a 96% confidence interval to Calvin Mercer. The second break came in January of 2024, when forensic accountants completed a flow of funds analysis on 23 months of activity across the three shell entities. The pattern was identical in every case. Estate funds entered Sentinel. They moved to Brookhaven within 48 hours. They moved to Magnolia within 72. From Magnolia, they wired to C. Marshall Holdings. From C. Marshall Holdings, they paid the mortgage on the lake house. They paid the tuition for Calvin Jr.'s MBA program at Emory. They paid for a Caribbean cruise the Mercers took for their 35th anniversary in March of 2023. The third break came in March of 2024, when Reginald Hampton, the first of the three administrators, agreed to cooperate. Hampton was 61 years old. He had recently been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. He told investigators, in a recorded interview that lasted 6 hours, that the arrangement had begun in late 2016 over drinks at a hotel bar in Atlanta after a continuing legal education conference. He said Calvin Mercer had described it to him as a way to make sure good attorneys get fairly compensated for work the state doesn't pay for. He said he had taken roughly $440,000 over 6 years. He said he had known what he was doing was wrong from the very first appointment. The smoking gun was already in the file by then. It was the bank record trail. A clean, traceable, methodical flow of 41 estates worth of money through 3 shell entities and into one account, controlled by one man, under a business alias that was never disclosed on any of the financial filings he was required to submit as a sitting judge. There were also the text messages investigators recovered through a search warrant on Marvin Doss's iCloud account, a thread between Doss and Mercer that ran from 2019 through 2023. DOSS, March 14th, 2021. Hollister file ready for your signature. Standard schedule? Standard plus extended. He had pension money. DOSS, June 8th, 2022. Brookhaven invoice on the Callaway estate. $2K extra? Make it 3. No one's coming for that one. DOSS, February 19th, 2023. Wexler petition came in on Hollister, out-of-state attorney. Just send what they asked for. They'll go away. They did not go away. The sealed indictment was returned by a federal grand jury in Atlanta on the morning of November 6th, 2024. It charged Calvin Eugene Mercer with 17 counts of honest services, wire fraud, 8 counts of money laundering, 2 counts of theft from a program receiving federal funds, and 1 count of conspiracy. Federal agents arrived at the Bibb County Courthouse at 8:14 the next morning. Judge Mercer was in his chambers, drinking coffee from a mug his daughter had given him for Father's Day. He was reviewing a probate case file. His robe was hanging on the brass hook beside the door, exactly where it had hung every weekday for 21 years. Special Agent Whitmore and 3 other agents identified themselves at the chamber's door. Mercer's longtime judicial assistant, a woman named Pearl Sutton, who had worked for him since 2007, stepped aside without speaking. The conversation, captured on Whitmore's body camera, lasted 4 minutes. Judge Mercer, I'm Special Agent Darrell Whitmore with the FBI. I have a federal warrant for your arrest. On what charge? Honest services fraud, money laundering, theft from a federally funded program. The full warrant is here for your review. There's a mistake. Whatever this is, there's a mistake. I want to call my attorney. You can call your attorney from the field office, Your Honor. Right now, I need you to stand up slowly and place your hands on the desk. Agent Whitmore, I have been on this bench for 21 years. I think I am entitled to an explanation before you walk me out of my own courthouse. Sir, the explanation is in the indictment. I'll be glad to walk you through it on the way to Atlanta. Right now, I need you to stand up. There is a pause on the recording. For 7 full seconds, Calvin Mercer does not move. He looks down at the case file on his desk. He looks at the coffee mug. He looks at the robe. I'd like to put the robe in the closet, please. The robe stays where it is, Your Honor. That's the property of the state of Georgia. He stood up. He placed his hands on the desk. He was handcuffed in his chambers, walked through the same marble corridor his mother had once mopped on her hands and knees, and led out the front entrance of the Bibb County Courthouse in front of 7 local news cameras that had been tipped off 40 minutes earlier. He did not speak again until he met with counsel that afternoon. We are about to walk into the trial of a sitting judge, and the prosecution's case is going to lay out, in detail, exactly what the dead could not say for themselves. If you want to see how the federal government dismantles a man who hid behind a robe for 2 decades, stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't yet. We do this every single week, and these are the cases the mainstream press rarely touches. The trial of United States versus Calvin Eugene Mercer began on April 7, 2025, in the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in Atlanta, Georgia, before the Honorable Ellis Brockman, a senior district judge appointed to the bench in 1998. The prosecution was led by Assistant United States Attorney Constance Yee, a 14-year veteran of the Public Integrity Section, who had previously prosecuted 3 sitting state legislators and a former mayor. The defense was led by Bertram Calloway of the Atlanta firm Calloway Lassiter, one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the Southeast. His retainer, paid in full in early December of 2024, was widely reported to be $600,000. The funds were later seized by federal forfeiture authorities, who established that the retainer had been drawn from one of the accounts traceable to the C. Marshall Holdings alias. The trial lasted 19 days. The government called 41 witnesses. They put Reginald Hampton on the stand for 2 days. They put Marvin Doss on the stand for a day and a half. They put a forensic accountant from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit on the stand for 3 full days, walking the jury, exhibit by exhibit, through every wire transfer, every shell entity filing, every signature line, every fee schedule. They also called Eileen Hollister, the great-niece from Bloomington, Minnesota, who took the stand on the 11th day of trial. She held her great-uncle's military medals in her hand as she testified. The court reporter's transcript captured this exchange. Mrs. Hollister, did you ever meet your great-uncle? No, ma'am. I didn't know he existed until I was 62 years old. What did you hope to receive from his estate? I didn't want money. I wanted his journal. I wanted his medals. I wanted to know where he was buried so I could put flowers on his grave. Did you receive those things? I received a letter from the probate court saying his personal effects had been deemed of no commercial value and disposed of. The defense rested without calling Calvin Mercer to the stand. On May 9, 2025, after 11 hours of deliberation across 2 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on every count. Sentencing was held on August 14, 2025. Adrienne Wexler attended. Eileen Hollister attended. 23 other heirs of estates Mercer had looted attended, several of them having flown in from as far away as Oregon and Maine. Judge Brockman allowed 7 of them to deliver victim impact statements. When it was his turn to speak, Judge Brockman addressed Mercer directly from the bench. Mr. Mercer, he said, I have presided over many corruption cases in my time on this court. I have sentenced congressmen. I have sentenced mayors. I have sentenced police chiefs. I have never sentenced a sitting probate judge before today because I had hoped, perhaps naively, that the men and women who handle the affairs of the dead would understand, more than anyone else, the sacredness of what is placed in their hands. You did not understand it, or worse, you understood it perfectly and chose to exploit it. You stole from people who could not speak. You stole from families who did not know they had been robbed, and you did so under the seal of a court that exists for the express purpose of protecting them. There is no sentence available to me today that will return what you took, but there is a sentence available to me that will ensure you never again sit in judgment of another human being. He sentenced Calvin Mercer to 144 months in federal prison, 12 years. He ordered restitution in the amount of $2.7 million. He ordered the forfeiture of the lake house, the Lexus, 2 brokerage accounts, and the Decatur property he had purchased for his son. He stripped Mercer of his judicial pension. He entered a permanent order barring him from ever again holding public office in the state of Georgia. Mercer was processed 3 weeks later into the Federal Correctional Institution at Estill, South Carolina, a low-security facility roughly 4 hours from the courthouse where he had presided for 21 years. He is expected to be released in 2036 at the age of 72. Adrienne Wexler returned to her practice in St. Paul. Eileen Hollister received her great-uncle's military medals from federal custody in October of 2025. She placed them on his grave at Andersonville National Cemetery the following Memorial Day. The Bibb County Probate Court remained closed for 3 weeks following Mercer's arrest, while every active case was audited. 41 estates have since been reopened. Settlements are still being distributed to heirs, some of whom did not know, until a federal letter arrived in their mailbox, that anyone in their family had ever died. This case was disturbing, but the case on the right-hand side is even more outrageous, and the man at the center of it had even more power than Calvin Mercer ever did. Click it now.